All right, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Katie Robbins, and I'm a project manager at Sonoma Rcd. So first of all, I would like to acknowledge why we're gathering tonight, and we would like to express our sympathies to all of those affected by wildfire in our communities. And I just wanted to let you know that we do recognize that everyone has experienced very different losses throughout this experience. And it's had different impacts, and therefore everyone is on a different journey post-wildfire recovery too. I think it's safe to say that we all wish that we could meet in a different way and under different circumstances, but please know that we are grateful to have this opportunity to support you in your recovery process in whatever way that may be. And we hope this meeting is a friendly environment for you to receive information and also get your questions answered, especially leading into the first winter after fire impacting your property. So just a few housekeeping items before we get started. Like I mentioned, the meeting is being recorded and it will be available for viewing after tonight. If you can please remain on mute unless you're speaking, that would be helpful to the other listeners as well. And if we could please hold questions until the end when we have our Q&A session. And if questions come up throughout the presentation and you don't want to forget, please feel free to enter them into the chat box. And Christine and myself and a few others will be watching those to bring up during the Q&A session as well. All right, so on our agenda this evening, I'll start off by doing a few introductions of some staff that we have on the call tonight, and then we'll talk about post-fire property considerations, both from the RCD and NRCS, and as well as resources available from both the organizations, and then we'll finish off with our Q&A session. So as I mentioned, my name is Katie Robbins. I'm a project manager at Sonoma Rcd. We also have joining us Jessica Pollitz, who's a professional engineer at Sonoma Rcd, Kevin Cullinen, a project manager at Sonoma Rcd and a certified professional in erosion and sediment control, Jason Wells, a registered professional forester at Sonoma Rcd, and we also have a few other RCD staff sitting in tonight as well, but those are the folks you'll hear from. And then we also have staff from our partnering agency, Natural Resources Conservation Service, joining us tonight. And that is Drew Logan-Bill, the NRCS District Conservationist, and Jeff Kelly, the NRCS Forester. So who is Sonoma Rcd? So we are a resource conservation district. We're one of two conservation districts in Sonoma County. We're non-regulatory, and we're a special district of the state. So we assist landowners with natural resource concerns, mainly focused around soil and water conservation by providing education, technical assistance, and financial resources to local landowners and members of the community. We're over 95% grant funded, and we strive to connect landowners to resources and assist in implementing best management practices and natural resource related projects on ag lands, working lands, open space, rural residential properties, among others. So our role in the community is really to balance the natural resource, human, and economic needs together to develop practical and sustainable solutions. So we respond to the most pressing natural resource concerns by helping landowners get the tools and resources they need to be a part of the solution. So with that brief introduction, I think we're going to dive right in, and I'm going to pass this over to Jessica for considering pre and post rain events.
Thanks, Katie. Hi, everyone. As Katie mentioned, I'm a civil engineer who works for Sonoma Rcd, and I'm just going to cover a few highlights of what to think about both before and after a rain event on your property. And I'd be happy to dive into more specific questions about your property during the Q&A or even following up after this. We'll provide all our contact info at the end of the presentation. So first thing to think about, any culvert that was plastic and went through the fire very likely could have burned. So as you see in this top photo, it looks like a culvert is still there because you see the corrugations, but it's actually a plastic culvert that had burned. So it's good to examine all the culverts that were on your property and check whether or not they're still there. If the culvert did burn out, there's a risk of dangerous road failure during the rainy season. So it would be a good idea to check that whether or not your culverts are still there and then replace them. When you are replacing a culvert, potentially you might need a permit if it's a culvert that conveys a designated stream or waterway. So one way to determine if you need any kind of permits is to consult a professional. So someone like the RCD, like myself, can help you determine that, or someone from NRCS as well. So my second piece of advice is consult a professional, and we can help you navigate that process. There's a lot of emergency permits that can easily be conducted to do some work quickly. So that's something to check out before the rains. I know we're getting rain right now. Another thing to think about is immediately after a fire during the first rainy season, there's likely going to be a lot more stormwater runoff coming down your hillsides and then also coming through the channels near your properties. And also that water will likely have a lot more debris. So just keep in mind, you might be seeing larger flow events than you've seen historically. And that's something that tends to happen because there's a lot less landscape and vegetation on the hillsides to retain that moisture in it. So potentially when you're replacing your culvert, you may think about replacing it with something larger. Again, that's something someone like myself could help make some recommendations on. So feel free to reach out. Another thing to do is install what we call a single post trash rack. You see in the lower left photo, it's just literally a metal post that you can hammer in a couple feet upstream of your culvert, and that will help get rid of some of the debris, some of the trash, so that it's not flowing perpendicular and can clog your culvert, but the rack kind of knocks it parallel so that it flows through your culvert. So that's an easy fix. Don't need a permit, just hammer that in. Another thing to do is keep an eye on your culverts both before, during, and after each rain event. So you want to go out there now if you can. Obviously not all of you are on your properties, and make sure they're cleaned out. Make sure there's not a big log or stick jamming them up. Clean them out. And then if you are on your property during a heavy rain event, it would be good to keep an eye on them and clean them out during the storm, just because any flooding or clogging like that can have other consequences, like cause erosion, cause overtopping of your road, failure of the culvert. So it's good to keep an eye on it. And then after every rain event, like maybe tomorrow, for example, it would be good to check on your culverts and clean them out. The last piece of advice I'll give is to really please listen to the public warnings that might come with these upcoming storms. The county and CAL FIRE officials have done studies based on both the Walbridge and Glass Fire footprints and have some modeling that tells them what and where is the highest risk for any kind of landslide or debris flow, and they will use that information to send out warnings when they have a storm event that's of concern. So if you get a text or a nixle or anything else like that that's telling you to evacuate, then please heed that warning, because that's the safest thing for you to do during that time. So that's all I have, a little quick overview, and then I'll be around during the Q&A portion to answer more questions about this kind of stuff.
All right, so I'm going to take over from here. Again, my name is Kevin, and I'm a project manager and also have my CPESC certification, which is in sediment and erosion control. Obviously I could, give a whole presentation on different erosion control measures, but I'll try to kind of just give a brief overview, and we can have time for questions later. But just, it's important to know that there's a few different types of erosion. Probably the ones that we're trying to prevent right now are mostly from splash, sheet, and rill. So just like, raindrops have a velocity as they're coming down or as they're falling, and they can displace soil particles, which then can, mobilize further down the slope in a rain event. So that's kind of that sheet erosion when it gets to a sheet flow. And then sometimes you can have rills forming, which are just kind of concentrations of water, right? That could then potentially develop into larger features, which we call gullies and things like that. There's also, of course, what Jessica talked about, like slope failures and landslides and things like that. But for now, I think this talk will cover kind of just some of the more simple things that you can do to prevent the splash and kind of sheet and rill erosion. A lot of, there's a lot of considerations when looking at a particular property. I would say each property is unique, right? So there's no one solution that fits all necessarily. So again, like Jessica had alluded to, definitely consult a professional, either the RCD or NRCS or another, licensed professional. But essentially, the most common treatments that folks are going to be utilizing are, one is going to be mulch, right? Which could take the form of straw mulch is very popular and effective. It could be wood chips, compost, gravel, or, a more fancy hydro mulch. But essentially, mulch is so great because it reduces, that raindrop impact and erosion. It's going to slow down runoff. It's going to trap sediment, and it adds organic matter to soil as well as retaining moisture for plants. So often that can be an effective solution. And essentially what we want, the focus oftentimes is keeping these bare soils covered, right? So if you have large areas that are kind of bare, completely bare of vegetation, then that's where you might want to consider some straw mulch. But another thing to think about is that oftentimes, nature provides its own mulch, right? Through leaf drop, pine needles, other leaves are dropping. There may just be sufficient residue that's left over from the fire if it didn't burn that hot, and that acts as a natural mulch. So you may not even need to add any extra straw mulch to the area. But again, it's going to be site specific. But as a general rule of thumb, yeah, you do want to keep the bare areas of soil covered, especially on hill slopes. In terms of seeding, this is kind of a tricky one because, again, it is very site specific. So I can't really give a blanket recommendation for seeding. Oftentimes, you do kind of have to look into the soil, figure out if the seed bank really has been kind of destroyed, nuked, and there's really nothing left, or is there evidence that seeding or seeds are still there in the soil? Because oftentimes you don't need to do any extra seeding. Just in this picture to the left here, we have kind of a before and after. This was during or right after the Nuns fire in 2017. And so we had this kind of eroding drainage that we were able to get grant funds for, to actually apply a more kind of significant erosion control, which involved, regrading the channel to be a little bit less steep and widening it, and then installing, straw, coir blankets and jute netting on top of that, in addition to wattles, to really stabilize everything. And it came out really nicely at the end. But again, this is a pretty involved treatment, and this may be well beyond the scope of what you need to do to just keep sediment to a minimum and erosion to a minimum on your property. And then, as another general rule of thumb, you want to make sure that you're not disturbing potentially unstable slopes by thinking that, oh, I have to cover this bare area of slope, but if it's seeming like it's unstable, by trying to get machinery in there or other things, you might end up causing more damage than if you just left it be. So just another consideration. Katie, if you can go to the next slide. So then the other thing to think about is our kind of 4S formula when it comes to runoff management. So, we like to slow it, spread it, sink it, and if possible, even store it, right? So the idea is you're trying to break up concentrated flow wherever possible. So in essence, we want to kind of spread the water out so it can start to slow down and infiltrate into the soil versus concentrating it into a certain area where it might cause more damage. And so this kind of runoff management applies to both landscapes, so hillsides and like on your roads or say dozer lines. So we have a dozer line pictured on the bottom left there. It's a little bit hard to see, but there's actually, so there's a water bar that's installed on it. And so what we would do oftentimes with these big dozer lines, if you have a dozer break where it is just bare soil, and CAL FIRE or some other crews may have already installed these, but you can install these series of drainage breaks on the road, right? So that the water doesn't have a chance to concentrate and run straight down the road, causing erosion that way. But at the same time, you do need to be aware of the outlets of these drainage features, these water bars or rolling dips, which are a little bit more robust features. So you want to make sure your outlets are protected either through rock or some other type of erosion control material, so that you're not creating another problem elsewhere on the property when you concentrate that. So yeah, use diversions cautiously and make sure your outlets are protected. Rich Casal, who used to work for NRCS, and some of you may have heard of him, but he always says, when you try to control water, you're trying to control nature, right? So often it's best to sometimes just let things be and make sure that the water can hopefully just sheet off nicely, instead of trying to create diversion ditches here and there and then creating other issues. The other thing to think about is what kind of practice you're installing. Is it just an emergency? Is it just like the straw wattle kind of emergency, just going to last one season? Is it a short term? Maybe it involves some rock or some other engineering, which would be a long-term practice. So just kind of think about what your overall goal is, and that often there's maintenance involved with upkeeping these practices, whether it's wattling, straw mulch, or an erosion control blanket or something like that. And then again, I'll just say again that there's no silver bullet, and Jessica alluded to this as well, is that, if you do get a warning from Vexel or any other warning like that from the county, you do want to make sure you heed that, because sometimes these practices can give you, a false sense of security. So if things really are unsafe, have an exit plan, have it, an emergency plan that you can get out when you need to. And then again, when in doubt, consult a certified professional, and always work with, experienced licensed contractors. And I think that wraps it up. Again, I'll be here for questions later.
All right, well, good evening, everybody. My name is Jason Wells. I'm a registered professional forester, and I guess trying to come up with general recommendations for forests, especially on these two fires that are, there's a pretty great variety of ecologies in these areas. So I really just wanted to get it down to what should people be concerned about right this second. And frankly, if there was something that I was most concerned about right now, it's what Jessica and Kevin have already talked about. That's really looking at your infrastructure. That's looking at your erosion control and any burned structures that might be there, making sure that we're containing all that kind of stuff. But getting into the forest side of things, I guess I'm here just to tell you that, first off, with the exception of very few cases, for the most part, there's no harm in waiting to see what trees survive the fire before you start cutting them down. And really, there's only two scenarios where that might not be the case. One of them for sure is hazard tree removal. So any trees that are overhanging public roads, infrastructure, survived buildings, but dead trees, major access routes where people are moving back and forth, where it could actually be a hazard to life and safety. You might cut those trees down before there's any sort of definitive, is this tree going to make it 5 years from now, right? And then the other time where you'd be hurried to make your decision as to whether or not to cut a tree down would be in a post-fire salvage operation. So with really only two tree species in Sonoma County, there is a commercial market for the wood value. That would be redwood and Douglas fir. And so some landowners want to try to recoup some of the costs from burning. And then more importantly, really than that, is they want to deal with the long-term hazards of trees falling down. So you've got dead standing Douglas fir, and one day those trees will not be standing. Whether or not we cut them down, they're going to come down. And so that's a long-term hazard for anyone who's trying to walk through these forests. The other thing is that that mass of wood left on site, while big trees are not generally easy to combust, if and when a fire comes through in the future, if that material is still on site and is able to actually combust like a full-sized log that's been dead, the intensity from that level of fire would be such that you might end up with actual conversion problems. So it would very potentially kill whatever trees come back, and it would burn at such a severity that you would have a lot of other effects. So removing some of that vegetation is not always a bad decision. And when it comes to post-fire salvage, you really only have about a year, especially with Douglas fir, before you'd be worried about beetles coming in, or other degrading effects basically on the logs. So the big thing with that is if you can salvage, someone might pay to take those logs off your hands. And after that salvage period, you're really on your own to figure out how you're going to deal with these fuels. And there's not really an easy answer. There's not a firewood market. Chipping large material like that is very complicated. Most chippers can't handle sizes of trees that we'd be looking at. And so it's exceptionally expensive. And you'd probably be looking at doing burn piles over many years. Anyway, for most people, especially when you have hardwoods, that immediately, and they're designed to deal with fire, right? So they have generally thick bark. A lot of our oak trees, they can resprout. Redwoods can resprout as well. And so for a lot of these trees, it's really a good idea, if it's not going to fall on someone, to just wait it out. Like there's really no downside to holding off for a year to see whether or not a tree resprouts. And then even if it resprouts, it's not really a guarantee that that tree is going to live. And a lot of things can affect that, right? So we could continue to have droughts. You could have a bug infestation of some kind, or really just a number of other stressors that, on top of the stress of surviving a fire, can kill a tree. And realistically, to get a better idea of whether or not a tree is going to survive after a fire, you're going to want to consult a professional. And so that would be either a forester or an arborist to come out and look at your trees and give you an evaluation as to whether or not they think that they're going to live in the next 5 years. And that's another important point to bring up quickly, is that the county has a program for post-fire waste removal that you can apply for. And generally that's for your, structures and cars and other man-made material to be removed. But it's also available for hazard trees over public infrastructure. So if you have a property with a public road that's running by the edge of your property, and you have dead trees that are overhanging that, these programs will cut those trees down and potentially remove the material. So anytime you can get somebody to remove material for you, I generally recommend that you take that opportunity, because it's very expensive to remove trees, and if someone's going to help you do it, that's not a bad thing to go with. So speaking about expenses, we could go to the next slide and we could start talking about really what the RCD and the resources that we're able to provide to help landowners deal with the post-fire environment. So the first and foremost, and what's really been keeping me busy the last couple of weeks, we provide technical assistance. So that's phone, email, or on-the-ground site visits to individual properties. Or with COVID, we kind of have to keep groups small, but we have been able to do a couple small group events, socially distanced outside with masks, that sort of thing, to be able to talk about problems that are for a couple neighbors and generally that people are experiencing the same things. So that would be going over and checking out things like those culverts that we were talking about, or erosion control concerns, or dead tree evaluation. I could give you a better idea of what trees I think are going to make it, what's not, and have these conversations on a site-specific basis. The other really big thing that the Resource Conservation District does is we're constantly applying for grants. And so grants come up and they change priorities, and we're monitoring that kind of stuff. And so creating a connection with us can also be a connection potentially to different funding sources. When we see that something comes up, or sometimes we'll have existing grant programs. There's the 319H grant that has some limited amount of funds to be able to help with post-fire erosion concerns. And so letting us know about your projects then allows us to be able to rank them and fit into what we think best suits what the grant funders are hoping for. We also work very closely in tandem with the Natural Resource Conservation Service, and they'll be speaking here shortly to talk a little bit more about what kinds of funding that they have available. But they're one of our main avenues of funding when it comes to tree mortality, and also just most of our tree management stuff through their EQIP program. Also erosion control and BMP materials. Right now, there's actually Sonoma Ecology Center has funding to be able to provide some BMP and erosion control stuff for people in the fire areas. And things like that come up where there may be sources. So we kind of help direct traffic to connect landowners with those resources that are available. And so there's a number of resources that are out there, and we've kind of consolidated a lot of that information into our website. So that's at the link that's listed there at sonomarcd.org in our resources tab and fire recovery. And also at sonomacountyrecovers.org would be another place to look. And so I believe at this point, pass it on over to Drew Loganville.
All right, everyone, how are you doing? I'm gonna get my quick little slideshow here up. Hopefully that is being shared. Maybe a thumbs up if that's working. And you guys can hear me all right? All right, cool. All right, well, my name is Drew Loganville. I'm the district conservationist for the NRCS and the Petaluma Field Office. We cover Marin and Sonoma County, and we have been working with a lot of people on fire recovery. So just a quick little background on NRCS. We are part of the USDA, so federal government agency. We are a voluntary agency, so it's we're non-regulatory. We're providing services much as the RCD is, and our goal is to offer free science-based advice to farmers and ranchers and private forest landowners. Within our office, we have soil conservationists, rangeland specialists, foresters, engineer staff, biologists. And we have, to the greater extent within the state, a lot of different other specialties that we could always tap into if we don't have the answers for you. And it's great resources for us to have. Typically our main sources of assistance for landowners after a wildfire kind of breaks into two categories. It's the technical assistance side, where that is where we could provide the free on-site assessments and advice, or answer emails or telephone calls and give that advice. Really our goal is to help people, direct people in the right direction on the best ways to treat their natural resources on their land. This includes that offering the expertise, technical planning, documentation, engineering. And we also have numerous handouts and fact sheets available on different different topics that we could provide to landowners based on their situation too. And I'll share a link to a lot of our handouts here at the end as well, as you'll also find many of them on the Sonoma Rcd's website. I would say I think we are most popular for our financial assistance, and primarily being our EQIP program, which is our Environmental Quality Incentives Program. And so through this program, we're able to provide funding to do a lot of these conservation practices that are going to address your resource concerns on your land following wildfire. So to go into that a little bit more, I have Jeff Kelly. He's our forester in the office, and he covers our Central Coast area, with Sonoma County being in the northern end. And he's going to talk a little bit about the catastrophic fire recovery. So I'll let him take it away.
All right, thanks, Drew. So we have a lot of fund pools under EQIP. One of the ones that helps people post-fire is catastrophic fire recovery. So it's a pool set aside just for individuals that have suffered fire and are looking to recover on their forest land. The focus of that fund pool is to provide immediate resource protection. Some of the things we are trying to help with post-fire is erosion protection, trying to minimize invasive species such as Scotch broom, looking to protect water quality, so avoiding erosion, sedimentation. And one of the bigger ones, Jason covered a little bit of this, reducing the fire hazard. You're going to have a lot of dead material most likely after a fire. So it's looking to help with reducing that excess dead vegetation, the buildup of all that vegetation. And then also there's assistance to help livestock infrastructure to help with grazing management. And some of the practices that we have under EQIP and under our catastrophic fire recovery fund pool, we can help with treating hazard trees, dead and dying vegetation, and helping with soil erosion and bare soil concerns. The practices, I'm just going to cover a few of these. So forest stand improvement, that's essentially thinning dead, dying, and damaged standing vegetation, so standing trees. Woody residue treatment, it's looking to treat that standing vegetation once it's downed, once it's on the ground, or material that's been killed by the fire and is already down before you come in and a tree falls. If you had a site, and Jason covered this pretty well, a lot of sites you're not going to need to plant trees unless maybe you had Douglas fir, for example, where most of the cones would have burned up in a fire. There's situations where we can help with replanting of trees on a site, or in some cases, people are looking to reduce the number of bays on their property and maybe looking to plant redwoods in their place, situations like that. A lot of times after a fire, you're going to have pretty heavy buildup of invasive species, particularly if they were there prior to the fire. So we can help with control of those invasive species. And then mulching, particularly in areas that are concerned for erosion or sedimentation. And then critical area plantings, looking at riparian areas, again, areas that you're concerned about erosion concerns. And then we also do provide financial assistance and help with if there's road damage, your culverts are burnt out. There are a lot of ways we can help with those issues.
All right, well, thank you very much. So, some details about that EQIP in particular is that it is the way the payments are made, it's a reimbursement. Typically, if you are interested, we come out, do a site visit, talk about particular practices, start the paperwork. We have an application process, getting farm records and eligibility in process. Some of our eligibility requirements are stated here. Being an agricultural producer or a private non-industrial forest landowner. You don't necessarily have to be active, in doing timber harvest or anything like that for forest landowners. But we do, as long as you have forest land, that's kind of what we look at as your crop. And then for forest landowners, one of the things we do require is a forest management plan. With the fire, we do have some avenues to simplify that process, but so if you don't have one, don't shy away from the program, just contact us and we could talk about some options. You know, having control of the land, so through either a deed or a lease, and complying with our adjusted gross income provisions, which is $900,000 averaged over the past 3 tax years. You know, as you go through the application, there is a section for historically underserved clients, and they are eligible for a higher payment rate and potentially advanced payments as well. So, you know, just in general, the EQIP program, before we can greenlight people to start work, we do have to make sure we cover our environmental compliance, which is through our NEPA compliance. And so, you know, the program is not necessarily set up as an emergency program, but we do have our ways to kind of streamline some of these processes, and we're trying our best to move things along. But we have found in past fires, it has been a little bit difficult to get funding in place and ready for people to start work, you know, relatively quickly, especially when we have some of these fires that come in October, late September, October. It makes it very difficult to get some of the immediate needs for erosion control practices right away. But, you know, again, we could try our best. I think we are much more successful if things can wait for a little bit further down the road, and we could, you know, definitely work towards that. I do foresee potential of having funding rounds available here fairly soon. So, you know, again, if you're interested, here our contact information's here, and we could start through the process. So with that, I also have a couple links here that we could also share. I could put maybe in the chat for our websites and some post-fire publications.
Great, thanks, Drew, and special thanks to Drew and Jeff for taking the time to join us tonight. We really appreciate your time and energy for being here and sharing all that information. I did put in the chat that I plan to follow up with an email after the event in the next couple days with some links and resources and contact information and email addresses. So we'll plan on using all the email addresses that we received when you registered for this event. But if for some reason someone forwarded you along the information to join tonight and we don't have your contact information, please feel free to email me and say that you would like to be added to that info list, and we'll include you on there. So now we'll start off our question and answer segment, and there's a couple ways we can do this. If it's quiet, feel free to unmute yourself and speak up, or we can use the raise hand function. If you go over to participants and raise hand, you can do that, or use the chat. But we did have one offer of someone to start. So Dan, would you like to start us off?
Sure, yeah, Dan Grout here. In addition to being a Mill Creek fire survivor, I'm also involved in the Mill Creek COPE organization, and as both a community co-leader and a fire victim, I just wanted to thank Katie and Jessica, Kevin, Jason, Drew, and Jeff. Had most of you on the line over the last few months or on my property, and just been wonderful that you put this together. And I'm sure it's just the beginning of the answering of 1,000 questions that everybody has specific to their property. And I, of course, have a few more questions. I've already started some of the paperwork on some of the programs mentioned tonight. So I want to encourage everyone to really make use of this great group of professionals, some of which I've known quite a while, and some of which I just met through the unfortunate circumstances we're all in. But for sure, hit these links, follow up. There's a lot here. A few questions I had, and I'm not sure who wants to take these. I'll just rattle off a few and they can take a life of their own. One is, I'm trying to get my hands on a copy of the draft county WERT reports, the fire severity, and which areas of the Walbridge fire in particular were hardest hit, and what kind of information is available there. And secondarily, I know some of you had the opportunity to come out to Mill Creek and visit Fred Ufrat's property and take a tour of that recently. And if there's any Mill Creek oriented comments you might have that might apply to the entire watershed, we'd be happy to hear those. And I'll take the rest of my questions to you individually later.
Hi, this is Valerie Quinto. I'm the executive director at Sonoma Rcd. And on the WERT question, I will follow up with the county folks that I've been engaged with and figure out if there is a version that can be distributed. I know that that has been supposed to go up on a website for public viewing, and so I will do my best to hope. It would be great if we can have a link to share in the email that Katie sends out. If we don't have that, we won't delay Katie's email. We'll send out another email with it, but I'll follow up on the WERT.
I guess as far as Mill Creek's concerned, from what I've seen from the watershed, the fire severity was pretty, different in terms of like the upper watershed being hit way harder than down, farther. And depending on where you are, you're also in different ecotones. So it's a little hard to generalize something like that. But I haven't been out there. Since it's rained at all. I'm hoping that at least on some of those eastern slopes where there was a lot of grassland, you're starting to see some green. I mean, that's really, I think, one of the first things to look for in a post-fire environment is when you start seeing green coming back. And usually it's those grasslands that you start to see the first signs of something popping back up. That and your hardwoods. But I don't know if I can think of anything specific to say that would really encompass everything that hasn't already been said. Your microphone's, you're muted, Dan.
Sorry. Is there anything you can comment about there's quite as much that burned, there's a lot of tan oaks that's still standing and dead and dried. And it just seems like, those got to be chopped down, masticated, and how do you treat the resprouts to avoid the same kind of forest reappearing in another 10, 20 years? Most of us own anywhere from 5 to 40 acres or even more, but that's a lot of work for a non-commercial timber. It almost seems like you have to go to a salvage logging operation just to afford to manage it.
Yeah, and the salvage logging operation, they wouldn't be treating your hardwoods necessarily. I mean, you could get some small amount of revenue off of that entire operation that then you could go back and put forward to that. But the situation you're describing is probably like the number one thing, excuse me, that we're sending people to equip for, and at least that's some form of cost share. So Sonoma Rcd, along with a number of other RCDs, recently partnered together with Rebuild North Bay Foundation, and we were awarded a grant through Proposition 68 in CAL FIRE. And essentially what we're going to be trying to do in the next 3 years is to provide a local incentives program. And we're still working out some of the kinks and the details, and we're not accepting applicants until January. But my hope is that program will be able to provide a higher percentage of cost share, or even possibly be able to be used in tandem with equip to be able to build on the amount that you're able to work on. So one of the questions that we've been mulling about how we want to try and do this, and nothing is finalized yet, but an idea that we've had is, say you enter into an equip contract and it costs a lot of money to do this stuff. So you're looking at, I think I could do 5 acres this year, and that's pretty good to do 5. But if you were then able to work with our program and say, well, how about we give you some additional money? Do you think then you could treat, 7 or 10 acres something like that with this additional funding thrown on top? Would you have it to be able to hire contractors to go and do this additional amount of work? So we're playing around with that sort of thing. We're trying to figure out how can we be creative and match funding, state dollars and federal dollars. But there is some amount of funding that's out there right now to do that kind of stuff. But you'll need a management plan, excuse me, to work with the program. But we should be able to get all that information if you've already worked with EQIP that we would need. And as far as that treatment, just so people have an idea, because it's very common with the hardwoods, you got a dead standing tree, and it could be a bay, it could be tan oak, it could be madrone, right? And so you've got that dead fuel component that one day that'll come down, but now you've also got this bush that's come back. And so the main treatment is you cut down the main stem, and then however you treat that woody debris is either chipping, pile burning, or you just do lop and scatter, where you just try and get that as close as you can to the ground and you leave it on site. And then you come back to the sprouts and you thin them out. So when you might have 10 or 15 resprouts coming back, you thin them down to like 2 or 3 of the thriftiest, best growing resprouts, and you pick those 2. And the idea is that you're hoping that rather than topping everything back and then just having the plant reinitiate again as a new resprout, you're hoping that the plant's going to focus its energy into those 2 stems and grow them faster and grow them, to eventually get you to a reasonable sized tree at a faster rate. So that's a very common prescription with these programs. There's a hand, Alyssa?
It's Elise.
Elise?
Yes. Hi.
Well, how's it going, Elise?
Thank you. I actually work at Windsor Oaks Vineyards, and I believe we were looking into a grant to replace the culverts and subsurface drains we have in the vineyard blocks. And I don't know if we got the grant, but I was just hoping to get some recommendations for any grading contractors or any companies that could look in the drains to inspect them, to maybe see how bad they are and if we need any to be replaced. That was my question. Yeah.
Jess, you got that one? There you go.
I can certainly follow up with you, Elise, about some like CCTV contractors that can actually put a camera through the drains and kind of tell what the status is of your subdrains and your culverts. Maybe if you want to chat me your email address.
Yeah.
Okay, on the Zoom chat, that would be great.
Okay, and it is, sorry, what's your name again?
Jessica Pollitz.
Jessica Pollitz, okay.
Yeah. I should be one of the hosts. I don't know if I show up at the top.
You do, yeah. Okay, thanks.
And we had a question about going back to that single post trash rack. So I can certainly share that photo again, but Kevin actually has some better photos. When I went to make it big, it got a little blurry. So he's going to share, and then Jessica can chat about those more. And one of the things that we might screen share, oh, there it is, perfect, is this typical of the single post trash rack. And this is something that I can include in the email as well. So don't worry about trying to take that all in right now. So Jess, if you want to take it away.
I mean,
yeah.
Okay, yeah, go for it.
Sorry, Kev, if you want to do it again.
No, go for it.
Yeah, so it's really just any kind of metal post. So it could be like a fence post or a galvanized pipe, old railroad track. And you put it upstream, so on the upstream end of your culvert, and it's located the same distance away from your pipe. That's the diameter of your your culvert. So if you have a 3-foot culvert, then you would locate it 3 feet upstream of the culvert, and then you want to hammer it into the ground or use a post hole, digger punch to put it into the ground. So it's basically twice as deep in the ground as it is sticking up. So, if it's a 3-foot diameter culvert, then you want to have 3 feet of the pipe sticking up, and then you want to have 6 feet of the pipe buried in the ground. So it's pretty simple. And like Katie mentioned, we can send out this typical detail that you see on the left-hand side. I don't know, Kevin, if you had any other thoughts.
I mean, obviously, if it's a really rocky or cobbly stream, it's not going to be easy. It'll be it's simple but not easy, potentially. But yeah, if you do have a T-post like pounder, those things can be super helpful for just getting that single T-post into the ground or into the channel. But they can help in a big way to help either capture or reorient any woody debris that's coming down the channel. So hopefully that it acts as a fail-safe feature so that the culvert won't plug. But again, always if you can, either yourself or if you can send someone else to get out to the property after a rainstorm is super helpful to make sure nothing has dislodged and is blocking the culvert inlet. That's pretty much it.
This is Drew. I think I'll add one more thing. The larger culvert you have, the more robust trash rack you want. I've seen maybe a typical fence T-post put in front of a large culvert, and you'd be surprised in high flows how quickly that thing gets bent over and is not working anymore. So if you have a big culvert, that's good to reach out to us and we could get you in the right direction of what to put in. But I've noticed larger culverts, you might want to go with like the larger metal pipes. Probably like a 6-foot culvert, you'd want something like that.
Good point. All right, I'll stop the screen share.
I don't see any questions, and I just want to kind of add on one thing what Jason was saying earlier about the typical treatments on forest land after the fire and cutting that dead standing material. I think one of the constraints is that if you have a property, even if it's just 40 acres or even 5 acres, it could be overwhelming the cost to do that treatment, especially after the fire. And we could definitely help provide funding towards that, but there's still could potentially be a significant out of pocket. And so I always kind of try to advise people to really think about what your priority areas are. And my recommendations are typically, go from where your structures are or your points of access, like your access roads, or anywhere that you typically congregate, as it could be a picnic area or wherever it may be, and work from those areas out and start making small advances out and continue to widen those over the years. I think it's a good just kind of start small and go for it. And as things and that you're going to keep your use safe in those areas, you're going to remove those hazard trees in areas you might be populating, and then reducing, and say if we do have a shorter fire return interval, you're going to have those areas treated so you can safely get out for access wise, or allow fire suppression to come in a safer manner as well. So.
Mark S. Mark S. for A.
Yeah, hi. This question relates more to, I think, single or more residential type situations. I know this has been talking more about forestry and larger parcels, but I've been trying to figure out in terms of erosion control, putting up wattles and things around the footprint of a burned structure. And the concern I have is that with debris removal, those things are going to be taken away as my understanding as hazardous waste if they capture any of the ash. And then you're replanting or well, maybe if it's through FEMA or through the public option, they will replace wattles or do some sort of erosion control afterwards. I guess the question is, in terms of what's the timeline? I know the storms are coming. On the other hand, if you put significant investment in terms of erosion control and then it's just taken away in debris removal, they're starting to do that here in the next few weeks. Any comments? I mean, are there any kind of free resources? I mean, in terms of wattles or that a homeowner can get, or are we going to be in a position where we're going to be coming with money perhaps twice to do erosion control?
This is Valerie from Sonoma RCD. It depends a little bit on your location, what resources are available. If you mentioned a smaller parcel, so if you are in the city of Santa Rosa, they are not able to install wattles for homeowners, but they are distributing free wattles for homeowners who had homes burned during the glass fire. So I just put a link in the chat, what did I Google? I think I Googled City of Santa Rosa wattles. Yeah, that's what I Googled, City of Santa Rosa wattles, and it got me to a site called Glass Fire Recovery that talks about the locations where those can be picked up. And it looks like they're doing weighted wattles, so that the installation of those might be a little bit simpler. And then out in rural areas, it would be the folks that I think Jason mentioned, Russian River Keeper and Sonoma Ecology Center have some funding from the county to do burned home site containment, particularly on home sites that are close to waterways, because that's the biggest concern in terms of toxic runoff, is those that are close to waterways. So if you are in those rural areas, our staff could help you get connected with them. Right. And then the last, oh, sorry, go on.
Oh, I just say, I'm actually in the city. Of course, the road right outside my property, our side of the road is the city, the other side of the road is in the county.
Oh, yeah.
But and I'm right on the back of Skyhawk off Los Alamos Road. So it's about a half an acre property, and it does go down into eventually slopes down into a canyon. And so, we're trying, I see perhaps the city or the county has already put some sort of a wattle in the culvert before I even got back to my property to inspect it. But yeah, I'll look for perhaps those city resources if I could just pick some up.
Yeah, it looks like Skyhawk Park is one of the locations where those wattles are available. So hopefully that would be an easy location for you to pick up some wattles for your site. And then it's my understanding, you totally right, that once, if a wattle was put in before debris cleanup, that those are supposed to be removed by the cleanup contractor because they could contain toxics. And generally speaking, I believe the cleanup contractor would then replace those with wattles that would unless they break down or get destroyed. Theoretically, the wattles that the cleanup contractor leaves would be able to just stay in place until a rebuild begins, and then that rebuild contractor kind of takes over.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Looks like we have a question from, I hope I said this right, is it Luann?
Yes, that is right. Yes, hi. I am. Hi, yes, I did ask that. About on-site.
So just down in the chat, if people don't have that in front of them.
Oh, I'll just read it then. It says, I want to talk about on-site milling. Many of us, and I think perhaps us, although we're hopeful, may find our heritage Doug firs are dead. PG&E says they're dead. We've had 3 arborists who, one agrees, 2 are uncertain. We'll wait till spring. We got them to say they'd wait till April. And it would be nice to have large beams milled for the rebuild. And it can be hard to find someone with a portable mill. And I wonder if you are working with people to, maybe some millers who would like to work with you in some coordinated way. So we could all, maybe he comes up to our road and does everybody's trees.
Yeah, unfortunately, we are not working with any particular contractor who's doing that. I don't have any referrals for you for someone with a portable mill. A couple things to remember about that. You can cut down and mill any trees on your property. That's fine, as long as it stays on your property. Once you, or if you decide that you wanted to sell that lumber in any way, you will now have needed to have already had a timber harvest permit, whether or not that be a post-fire exemption or a full-on timber harvest plan. But it is illegal to sell lumber that you have milled on your property. The other thing that I'll mention
Illegal
about
without
that,
the permit, you mean, or you?
yes, you would
Has
have
already
needed.
cut trees down. We've got trees that PG&E clear cut our Erland Road.
Yep.
And
Yep. Yeah, technically those were done under an emergency exemption, and it is possible to sell those trees now after the fact, but you're still going to need to get a registered professional forester to deal with someone who, you know, you'd be selling it to a big mill rather than, but I'm getting away from your question here. The other thing I wanted to say about that was, if you plan to use wood, you can't expect to use the Douglas fir on your property for structural beams in your home. So it could be used as a facade. You could have a house that was designed to be load bearing with other, you know, other wood or other structures, and just have that on the outside, not providing anything. But what you would need if you wanted to use it for framing timber or for any sort of construction of a permitted structure is that you would need to have someone actually come out and grade that lumber. So you would need to hire someone who is a professional mobile grader. That's someone who inspects lumber. I have no idea where you're going to find that person.
otherwise,
I
it's
do know
a big waste of trees to me. And we did have a couple of arborists suggest someone, and he suggested don't do framing lumber, just do beautiful 12 by 8s and things that can be, maybe they're just in the ceiling and maybe they're decorative, I don't know, or they're a 12 by 8. I mean, they're 200-year-old or more heritage trees, so they should be good.
Yeah,
So
you can also build outbuildings. So fences or decks. Not certain on this one, but maybe a barn or a tool shed or something like that. You'd have to double check. I think that you're going to run into it. It's going to be whenever you have to get a building permitted that you would run into that issue.
Who can guide us toward the people that know about all this?
Are about permitting for new construction?
No, yes, that, and also somebody who has a portable mill and is qualified to grade the quality of the lumber that you suggested that we do need. Once we get a permit, then we need to get the guy.
I just don't think that that's something that happens down here enough. I know that those are people that's a profession that some people do, but I don't think that's something that you would probably have to get someone from Oregon, you know, would be my guess.
I mean,
and I haven't spent enough time Googling, searching, calling people, because this isn't normally a big thing, but that's what you would need to do.
I see what you're saying, but somehow maybe we can all group together on finding this, because there's a big need for it, at least on our road. And I know there was in Lake County too, before when they had their fires.
And that's a great point also, just in general, about the post-fire response. It behooves you to speak with your neighbors and to work on a larger context, because no matter what you're doing, you're going to get better rates if you're working on a larger project. If you can work with a land clearance company or a reforestation specialist who comes in and does site prep or cuts down these trees and whatnot, and you can offer them a 200-acre job, they're going to give you a much better rate than if you offered them an 1.5 acre that they have to move equipment out or do whatever to get that kind of stuff. So it works to try and coordinate that kind of stuff with your neighbor. I think that's a great point. But unfortunately, I don't have any more real resources for you about portable mills. Google and Craigslist would be.
Well, if somebody comes across your way, you're more connected than I am.
Mm.
Thank you. Do I mute myself again? Here we go.
I guess if there's no other questions, I had one or two things before we all break for dinner. We all must be hungry. One was on broom and, you know, likely resprouts, and the other's on sudden oak death. I know the last time we had a drought followed by a bit of a wet winter, it really took off on our property on halfway up Mill Creek. And I'm just wondering, other than pulling and glyphosate treatment, you know, is there anything we should expect to be able to have to address in the next several months after the rains let up?
I think the biggest thing with broom is treating it immediately when it's young and not waiting. It takes 2 years for broom to start to create seed pods. And one of the most pervasive parts about broom is that each one of those seed pods holds tens of thousands of potential seed. And then there are hundreds of seed pods on an individual broom tree. And so that seed can persist in the soil for decades, like 60 years. So when you get something coming back after a fire, when it's still young, you can either mow it, you can graze it. There are certain, like goats will eat it when it's young. You'll want to talk to someone with more experience in grazing, and there are, I would probably recommend talking to Stephanie at UC Cooperative Extension. I'm blanking right now.
Stephanie Larson.
Thank you. Yeah, and she can give you more information about specific grazing animals to be able to deal with that kind of thing. The other thing about broom that you can do in the first year, you can use a propane torch. It's like a big burner that's on the front on a stick with a propane torch, and you can wilt them. So you're not trying to light them on fire. You're just grazing it with heat, and it'll cause them to wilt back, and then they're dead, like the top. And so that's another method if you weren't going to try and actually go and like mow them or use a brush mower. Yeah, and that's a big problem, because other than that, I mean, if it's 2 years in, you're looking at using gly, and most people don't like the idea of using herbicide. So I feel like there was, tan oak. I guess tan oak's a harder thing to try and deal with without using herbicide. Yeah, I don't know. The best way, I guess, is, and especially for dealing with post-fire, is, again, it's like that treatment that I already mentioned, where remove the top, thin out the basal sprouts, and then, you know, in Mill Creek, you're probably going to get sudden oak death still, despite the fire, because even if there's no sudden oak death that's right there, sudden oak death can actually, I just learned this the other day, it can actually move through the air, through water vapor. So not much hope of this major fire getting rid of our sudden oak death problem. And at that point, we're just going to be dealing with sudden oak death. Did that answer that question?
It did. Thank you much. Appreciate it.
Sounds like Ray Krause has a question.
Quick question regarding star thistle. Will the fire destroy the star thistle seed in the seed bank, or can I expect that to resurrect itself in profusion after the fire?
I might defer to someone else, but I would suspect the answer is no, especially when you're talking about a seed. Most fire doesn't eliminate the seed bank because that heat is above where, especially in grasses, that's why they're adapted to fire. They do pretty well once the seed is actually in the seed bed. It burns over the top of them, and now they have nice, fresh, burned material to be able to use good nutrients, and then they grow back out. But I'm wondering if there's someone who is more knowledgeable about star thistle management than myself who might want to talk.
I would just agree with your thoughts, Jason, that it really depends on how severe the fire was and how deep it burned into the soil. But I would agree with your statement that I think yellow star thistle is pretty persistent, and it does take advantage of disturbed areas, and I think it can definitely survive fires if the seed is not destroyed in the soil.
Would a transline treatment be a appropriate response in an early recovery stage?
I'm not familiar with the transline treatment. What can you describe that?
It's just an herbicide that is specific to non-grasses.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine that an herbicide in the first kind of regrowth, and then probably needing some follow-up treatments as well would be your best bet. But yeah, it's a persistent weed, unfortunately.
Thanks.
Yeah, if you have questions about herbicide application, you're going to want to find a qualified pesticide applicator, and then they would know a lot more about that. And because we have so many vineyards and agriculture around here, there are a lot of them in Sonoma County. And I'm blanking on the agency that deals with that, but there's a whole list of qualified applicators out there.
So we just put some more resources in the chat. Thanks, Val. Yellow Star Thistle publication. I also noted our e-newsletter that goes out monthly. And that's something that we put together. It's usually packed with information, resources, funding as it comes available. So if you're not already signed up for that, please look into that if you're interested.
All right, I'm not seeing any more hands raised or chats coming through. So just a reminder to be on the lookout for that follow-up email. And if you would like to get in touch with staff for more resources or technical assistance site visits, if you feel like you have specific property concerns that we could help you address, we are available for those site visits. Feel free to follow up with myself or any one of our staff. Staff emails are on our website, sonomarcd.org. Or we can all put you in touch with who the most appropriate person would be. Thank you for joining us tonight, and take care, stay safe, and thank you. We all appreciate getting to meet you tonight.
Thank you.